New York, 9 a.m. Nina Roberts stepped out of her company's headquarters, a luxurious skyscraper in the heart of Manhattan. She had just finished an important meeting and was preparing to travel to Los Angeles to finalize a business deal worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Today was a crucial day for her, a significant milestone in the career she had fought so hard to build. A sleek black Cadillac SUV was already waiting at the curb. Her personal driver, Daniel, promptly stepped out and held the door open for her. "Ready to head to the airport, Ms. Roberts?" he asked politely. "Of course, Daniel," she replied, sliding into the plush leather seat. The SUV smoothly pulled away from the towering glass building, heading toward the private airport where her Gulfstream G700, a $75 million luxury jet, awaited its owner's arrival. Nina gazed out of the window, a small smile playing on her lips. She was not just a successful entrepreneur, she was one of the wealthiest black women in America. And she had earned every bit of her success through sheer talent, resilience, and strategic brilliance. But what she didn't know was that a shocking insult awaited her at the airport. When Nina's SUV arrived at the private airport, the ground staff quickly stepped forward to greet her. They knew exactly who she was. Her private jet, a masterpiece of aviation technology, was parked on the runway, ready for departure. But as she approached the aircraft stairs, a middle-aged man with silver hair, dressed in a pilot's uniform, blocked her path. He folded his arms and looked her up and down with a skeptical expression. "Excuse me, but I can't allow you to board this plane," he said. Nina blinked, momentarily taken aback. She frowned, looking at the pilot with confusion. "I'm sorry, who are you?" she asked. "I'm Captain Richard Tate for this flight," he said, emphasizing the word captain with a smug air, as if asserting his authority. Nina took a deep breath. She had a feeling she knew what was happening, but she wanted to see just how far this man was willing to take his attitude. "Well then, Mr. Tate, I am the sole passenger for this flight. And Jean to board my plane now." Tate raised an eyebrow, then let out a condescending chuckle. "You're the sole passenger? Sorry, but I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding." Nina remained composed, but she could clearly sense the disrespect in his tone. "There is no misunderstanding," she said firmly. "I own this aircraft." And in that very moment, the expression on the pilot's face changed entirely. Tate's smile vanished instantly. His confident demeanor faltered, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. His mouth opened slightly, as if he were searching for the right words, but hesitation clouded his sharp blue eyes. He was trying to process what he had just heard, yet something in him resisted the truth. "Are you joking?" His voice had dropped to a lower, almost incredulous tone, though the skepticism was still evident. Nina did not flinch. Her expression remained cool, unwavering. "I don't joke about my business," she said, her tone cold and precise. Tate glanced around, as if expecting someone to confirm or deny her words. His gaze swept across the empty tarmac, the polished surface of the private jet reflecting the evening sun. He was grasping for some validation, some logical explanation that aligned with his beliefs. In his mind, the idea that a black woman could own such an expensive aircraft was beyond reason. It didn't fit the narrative he had always accepted. There had to be another explanation. And so, instead of accepting the reality before him, he clung to his own prejudice. "I think you must be mistaken," he said, his voice laced with doubt. "This plane belongs to a successful businessman, not," he hesitated, catching himself just in time. Nina didn't need him to finish that sentence. She had heard this kind of dismissal before, too many times to count. The unspoken words lingered in the air between them, thick and heavy with implication. Her dark eyes met his without a hint of hesitation, her voice sharp as steel. "Not who?" she challenged. "Not a black woman." Tate stiffened. His jaw tightened, his fingers curling into his palm. He was cornered, but still unwilling to back down. "I'm just following regulations," he said quickly, his voice edged with defensiveness. "I need to verify your identity before allowing you on board." Nina exhaled slowly, forcing herself to remain composed. She had dealt with men like him all her life, men who refused to acknowledge her success, who viewed her accomplishments as anomalies rather than the result of relentless hard work and perseverance. But today, she wasn't in the mood to indulge ignorance. She reached into her handbag and pulled out her phone. Her fingers moved swiftly across the screen, dialing a number she knew by heart. The call barely rang once before it was answered. "James. I'm standing in Vron. T of my jet, but your pilot won't let me board." The air around them grew heavier, the tension thick and palpable. "What? Who stopped you?" The voice on the other end belonged to James Caldwell, the CEO of the private aviation company. His tone had turned sharp, brimming with anger. Nina flicked her gaze toward the man before her, watching his confidence wane. "Captain Richard Tate," she said simply. For the first time since their exchange began, genuine fear flickered across Tate's face. He knew that name. And now, he realized too late that he had made a grave mistake. James's voice dropped to a dangerously low register, his fury unmistakable. "Hand the phone to him. Now." Nina lowered the phone, extending it toward Tate. Her eyes locked onto his. "You have a call." Tate hesitated, his face pale. His mind raced, scrambling for a way out of this. "I don't need to." "That's fine," Nina cut in, her voice as smooth as silk but carrying an unmistakable weight of authority. "If you don't want to take the call, James will deal directly with airport management. And I guarantee you'll be out of a job in 5 minutes." Tate swallowed hard. His fingers twitched before he snatched the phone from her hand and pressed it to his ear. "Hello. This is Captain Richard Tate." The voice that erupted from the other end was loud enough that even Nina could hear it. "Tate. You are immediately fired." The silence that followed was deafening. Tate's eyes widened in shock. His mouth opened, as if to plead his case, but no words came. The weight of his arrogance, his assumptions, and his prejudice crashed down on him in an instant. James's voice continued, each word dripping with authority. "Mrs. Roberts is the owner of that jet, and you just made a serious mistake." There was nothing left to say. Tate stood frozen, his world unraveling around him. The job he had built his career upon was gone in mere seconds, all because he couldn't see past his own bias. Meanwhile, Nina took her phone back, her expression unreadable. Without another word, she turned and strode toward her jet, her heels clicking against the pavement with purpose. As always, she moved forward without looking back. Richard Tate couldn't believe what had just happened. In his mind, everything was spinning. He was a veteran pilot with over 25 years of experience. How could he be fired over a single phone call? His career, his reputation, all reduced to nothing in a matter of minutes. Nearby airport staff started murmuring, some even pulling out their phones to record the scene. No one could have imagined that a seasoned pilot like Richard Tate would meet such a fate. It had all happened so fast that even he hadn't fully grasped it yet. Nina stood still, maintaining the posture of a winner. She didn't need to say anything more, the truth had spoken for itself. She had faced many challenges in her journey to success, but she never expected to be the one teaching a veteran an important lesson about respect. Richard Tate tried to salvage the situation. "I'm sorry. I didn't know that you were the owner." But Nina had heard enough. She coldly interrupted him. "So if I weren't the owner, you would have continued to insult me." The pilot opened his mouth, but no words came out. Because he knew she was right. He had acted on his own biases, and now the consequences were clear. Nina smirked slightly, then shook her head. Next time, check your facts before letting prejudice dictate your decisions. He lowered his head, knowing he had lost everything due to a single wrong judgment. Airport security arrived and escorted the pilot out of the area. The En Tire airport buzzed with whispers as Richard Tate walked away with a completely defeated expression. This incident was sure to go viral on social media, and he knew his reputation would suffer greatly. After the dismissal of Captain Richard Tate, a replacement pilot was promptly assigned to take his place. The private airport buzzed with murmurs of shock and curiosity. Some aviation staff who had overheard the phone call knew that Richard Tate had been fired on the spot. 2 airport security officers approached, flanking the disgraced pilot with stern expressions. "Mr. Tate, we have orders to escort you off the premises immediately." Richard Tate stood frozen, his eyes wide with disbelief. The reality of losing his job within mere minutes was sinking in, but he wasn't ready to accept it. He turned to Nina, desperation flashing in his gaze, but she had already shifted her focus to her new flight crew. "You can't do this to me," Tate shouted in frustration. But no one cared. A nearby aviation technician chuckled quietly, shaking his head as Tate was led away. Meanwhile, on social media, the moment was already making waves. A staff member had recorded the scene and posted it online. With the caption, "Never underestimate someone based on appearances." It was a harsh lesson for the former captain, but Nina felt no sympathy. He had brought it upon himself. Once Tate was out of sight, a ground crew member stepped forward, bowing slightly in respect. "Ms. Roberts, we sincerely apologize for the inconvenience. Your new pilot is ready." A young female pilot, likely in her early 30s, stepped forward, clad in a crisp airline uniform. She smiled politely, exuding both professionalism and confidence. "Ms. Roberts, I'm Amelia Carter, your new captain. Your jet is ready for departure." Nina met her gaze and nodded approvingly. "Good. I don't like delayed flights." With that, she ascended the steps of her private jet, leaving behind all the prejudice and disrespect she had just endured. After the dismissal of Captain Richard Tate, a replacement pilot was promptly assigned to take his place. The new pilot was a young woman who greeted Nina with respect, her posture upright and professional. Despite the tension lingering in the air from the previous confrontation, she carried herself with poise and assurance. "Ms. Roberts, we sincerely apologize for the earlier incident. Your jet is ready for departure." Nina gave a small smile, nodding in acknowledgement. She could sense the murmurs of the airport staff still lingering in the background, their whispers carrying a mix of awe and disbelief at what had just transpired. As she ascended the aircraft steps, pulling along her luxury suitcase, she couldn't help but reflect on the encounter. It wasn't the first time she had faced prejudice, and she knew it wouldn't be the last. But this time, the consequences had been immediate and unmistakable. Inside the lavish cabin, she settled into her seat, exhaling slowly. The plush leather of the seat embraced her as she poured herself a glass of champagne, the bubbles rising delicately. She raised the glass with effortless grace, a quiet toast to perseverance, to resilience, and to the power of self-worth. This was a victory achieved without shouting or arguments, just the undeniable power of truth speaking for itself. It wasn't about proving a point or seeking vengeance. It was about demanding the respect she had earned through years of relentless dedication. Through the window, she could still see the commotion on the tarmac. Some airport staff were shaking their heads, others whispering among themselves. Richard Tate, the former captain, was nowhere in sight, presumably escorted out as ordered. His downfall had been swift, yet deserved. He had let his prejudice speak before reason, and it had cost him dearly. "Now, take me to Los Angeles. I have a deal to close." And with that, Nina's private jet ascended into the sky, leaving behind a last lesson on prejudice and the cost of underestimating others. As the aircraft climbed to cruising altitude, she leaned back and closed her eyes, allowing herself a moment of peace. She thought of all the challenges she had faced, every closed door, every skeptical glance, every moment of doubt cast upon her simply because of who she was. Each of those moments had only fueled her ambition, pushing her further until she had built an empire that no one could deny. Her phone buzzed. A message from James Caldwell, the CEO who had swiftly ensured justice was served. Handled. Hope you have a smooth flight. See you in LA. Nina smirked, typing back a simple response. Appreciate it. Next time, hire better pilots. She set the phone aside, taking another sip of champagne. The city lights below began to fade as the jet soared above the clouds, carrying her forward, always forward, toward the future she had built for herself, on her own terms. The luxurious cabin of the Gulfstream G700 was almost unreal in its opulence. Everything was wrapped in the finest leather, the desk was made of rich walnut wood, and the seats were upholstered in soft velvet. A flight attendant approached, carrying a silver tray with a glass of champagne ready to be served. Mrs. Roberts, would you like some champagne before takeoff? Nina smiled lightly, taking the glass, swirling the golden liquid gently before taking a small sip. She leaned back in to her seat, crossing her legs in a display of effortless power. Outside, the ground crew was making final preparations for departure. The sound of the jet engines gradually grew louder, signaling that the flight was about to take off. Through the intercom, the female pilot, Amelia Carter, made an announcement. Mrs. Roberts, we are ready for takeoff. Wishing you a pleasant journey. Nina smirked slightly. She picked up her phone, opened her email, and resumed working as if nothing had happened. Ed. But the truth was, she had just won another battle, and she was the undisputed victor. The private jet slowly rolled down the runway before soaring into the vast blue sky. Less than an hour after Nina's plane finally took off, news of the airport incident spread like wildfire across social media. Headlines dominated major platforms. Black female entrepreneur denied access to her own private jet, pilot fired on the spot. Major news outlets, including the New York Times, Forbes, and Business Insider, rapidly picked up the story, amplifying the outrage. It's absolutely unbelievable that someone can still judge another person solely based on their skin color in this day and age. On Twitter, thousands of comments exploded in response to the injustice, with users sharing their shock, anger, and personal stories of discrimination. Meanwhile, Richard Tate, now unemployed and publicly disgraced, found himself cornered by public opinion. He attempted to explain himself, but the world was no longer interested in his excuses. In the wake of his dismissal, Tate attempted to clear his name. He released a public statement claiming that his actions were motivated by standard security concerns rather than racial bias. However, few were convinced. Screenshots of past comments and behavior surfaced online, further reinforcing the narrative that his actions were rooted in prejudice. Major airlines and private aviation firms distanced themselves from Tate, ensuring that his professional future remained uncertain. Legal experts speculated that he might pursue a wrongful termination lawsuit, but many believed he stood little chance of winning. On her private jet, Nina picked up her phone and glanced at the flood of emails and messages pouring in from supporters. She knew that this wasn't just about winning a minor dispute, she had just helped change the way people viewed bias and power. A journalist reached out via email, requesting an interview about the incident. They asked if she would like to make a public statement. Nina paused for a moment, then typed a short yet powerful response. No need. What needed to be said has already been said, through action. She set her phone down, exhaled deeply, and took another sip of champagne. At last, she could enjoy her flight, free from any barriers or restrictions. Beneath the vast sky, the world continued to spin, but today, an important lesson had been delivered to those who judge others based solely on appearances. Never underestimate someone. You might just be disrespecting the very person who will determine your fate. Nina's Experian. CE is not an isolated incident but rather part of a broader issue of systemic bias in elite spaces. While Black entrepreneurs are making historic strides, they continue to face barriers in industry's domain.